Welcome to chapter 23 of the book of 2Chronicles. It begins, as you see, Joash reigns in Judah. Actually, that probably should be changed to Athaliah reigns in Judah, because the reign of Joash doesn't really begin until the 24th chapter. But it is what it is, and in the 7th year, Jehoiada determined and took the commanders of hundreds. So apparently 7 years is talking about is after the death of Joram, where Athaliah is reigning, and he has, as we found out in the last chapter, he married Jehoiada, the priest, high priest, married Jehosheba, and him and his wife hid Joash in the place where they lived, and preserved him after Athaliah killed all the other sons and that could have been rulers of Judah. So she would be the ruler of Judah, and she was basically the daughter of Jezebel, that was up in Jezebel and Ahab that were up in Israel. So she wanted to see the end of Judah, so Israel could take over this whole area, I would imagine. But so Jehoiada, the high priest, he took the commanders of hundreds, and now I'll give the Greek name, Azarian, son of Eoram, and Ishmael, son of Elhanan, and Azarian, son of Ovid, and Maasian, son of Adaiu, and Elisaphat, son of Zachariu, with him in covenant. So time was ripe, so he makes a covenant with these rulers, commanders of hundreds of the military. He probably told them that, well, we have the son. And they encircled Judah and gathered the Levites from out of all the cities of Judah, and the rulers of the families of Israel, and came into Jerusalem. So when they found out that there was still a person of the lineage of David, then they went around Judah and gathered the people that they could. They started with the Levites, apparently, and the rulers of the families, and letting them know that they were in covenant with Jehoiada to put Joash, put him in reign. And all the assembly ordained an ecclesia, a church is in the New Testament, but it's an assembly, a covenant in the house of God with the king. So an assembly with a covenant in the house of God with the king. It's sort of like what the church is being in a covenant with Jesus, who is the king, our king. And and he said to them, behold, the son of the king, let him reign, in the imperative, as the Lord spoke concerning the house of David. So they wanted to continue the house of David, and were believers in Jehovah, Yahweh, and wanted to continue the way that Yahweh and Jehovah spoke. So this was in 842 BC. So the lineage of God's dealing with man came through Abraham, and then his family, Isaac, Jacob, and down through to Moses and into the promised land, and then with Samuel, the judges, Samuel, and then King Saul, King David, Solomon, on down to this line. It continues on down. That was probably 1,000 years or more there. And this is 2,800, 2,900 years before us today. And now this is the word which you shall do, Jehoiada said. The third from out of you, Triton, from out of you, of the priests and of the Levites, enter on the Savaton, and go into the gates of the entrances, and this is probably the house of God, I would imagine, and the third unto the house of the king, and the third unto the gate in the middle. And we have some pictures, so let's go down to our pictures here. Now here is the days of Solomon, what it might have looked like. And here you see the temple, and then Solomon's palace is down here, and then his original, the forest of Lebanon, was here and was built on over the years into this giant royal complex. And then there is this courtyard all out here, which is where a lot of the people would go. Then priests would go in here, and then they would enter into the temple, and then the Holy of Holies was inside of that. So here he's talking about going into the gates, the third into the house of the king, which we pointed out there, and then the third into the gate in the middle, which was probably in between the house of the king and into the temple area. And all the people will be in the courtyards of the house of the Lord. And let no one enter into the house of the Lord except the priests and the Levites and the ones officiating to the Levites. So we had the house of the Lord earlier in the picture and a couple of chapters ago. So the priests and Levites went into there. And they shall enter. Well, let me go find that picture and I'll bring it up here. I'll put this on pause for a second. So now here's the temple, and out here further is the courtyard where the people were. Now, whether there was a wall out here is a possibility, but we have another picture we can go into and give a little bit more of an idea. And this is here is the temple. There's the outer court. So now apparently the middle gate was here. This is where they stationed a third of them, and then a third of them at the temple, and then probably a gate over here that goes to the area of the king down here, something like that. And he continues, they shall enter, for they are holy. And all the people that guard the watches of the Lord. And the Levites shall encircle the king round about, each man and his weapon in his hand. And the one entering into the house shall die. So they stood in front of the house there, and no one could go in. If they tried, they would be executed. And they will be with the king. And so apparently they brought the king into the house for his entering and exiting. And the Levites and all Judah did according to all as much as Jehoiada the priest gave charge. And each man took his men, and entering on the Sabbath unto exiting on the Sabbath. Now exactly where it means entering on the Sabbath and exiting on the Sabbath, as they did, I'm not sure. For Jehoiada the priest did not rest up the daily rotations, so that things were continuing as normal. And Jehoiada the priest gave the commanders of hundreds orders, and the swords and the large shields, and the small shields, which was of King David in the house of God. So apparently they had these weapons stored somewhere in the house. Gives all these men these shields and weapons. And he stationed all the people, each with his weapons, from the protrusion of the house at the right unto the protrusion of the house at the left. So let's go back down and find out what that protrusion was. And here it is down here. So this is a protrusion here, and there was another one on the other side here. So apparently they were over on both sides, as I can imagine. By the altar. So that would have been by the altar, and at the house by the king round about. And he led out the son of the king. Now he might have been down there in the king's palace, and went up that courtyard, and put upon him the crown. Well, Basileon is the crown, and the testimony, some type of a part of the royalty that they wore, and the testimony to the high priest were the metal plate that hung down on their chest with all the 12 stones in the 4 rows. And he made him to reign. So they give him the reign. And Jehoiada the priest and his sons anointed him, poured oil on his head, and said, "Let the king live." And Athaliah heard the sound of the people running and acknowledging and praising the king. And she entered to the king into the house of the Lord. So apparently they allowed her to come in to the house of the Lord. And we'll go to another section here. And we have Safari. If you go to Wikipedia, it has a great article on Athaliah and all about her. Some of the stuff, I don't know how accurate it all is, but it gives you a summary of all the things of Athaliah, how evil she was and the things she did to destroy Judah. And she beheld, and behold, the king stood at his station. He was only 7 years old now. Oh boy, the crown on. And at the entrance were the rulers and the trumpets, the musicians with their trumpets. And the rulers were around the king, and all the people of the land were being glad and trumpeting with the trumpets. That's the metal trumpets. And the ones singing with the instruments of the odes, and the ode singers, and imnuntes, hymn comes from that. The hymn, one's hymning, or one's singing praise. And Athaliah tore her stoline robe and yelled and said, "Conspiracy, conspiracy." And came forth Jehoiada the priest and gave charge to the commanders of hundreds that he had made the covenant with earlier, and to the archegis, the chiefs of the dynamios, the force, dynamic, comes from that. And he said to them, "Lead her outside of the house," ektos, and ekto is the outer part of something, "and go forth after her, and let her die by the sword." For the priest said, "Let her not die in the house of the Lord." So she was in there, and they didn't want her to die in the house of the Lord. So what happens? And they placed hands upon her, Athaliah, and she went through the gate of the horsemen of the house of the king, and they put her to death there. So led her down that passageway to the area of where the king lived, and put her to death there by the sword. And Jehoiada ordained a covenant between him and between the people and between the king to be for a people to the Lord. So here we have the failure of Athaliah, the kingdom of the north, Israel, to defeat the lineage of David, and they are not able to, as the Jehoiada puts Joash to reign and kills Athaliah, and the Lord is worshipped by all these people, and they have a covenant to do so. And they took it seriously. So when we have a covenant to worship, bow down to the Lord Jesus, then what do? We take it very seriously and destroy the things that are not of Christ in with us. Now, we don't have the power, nor are we taught to destroy the other people or the things of the other people, but at this time they were. And it says, "And all the people of the land, Giz, entered into the house of Baal." That was the god that Jezebel had, and then a daughter Athaliah. And they brought it down from Sidon and down into Israel, and then down into Judah, into the someplace, the house of Baal, someplace there on that mountain. And they tore it down. And his altars and his images they ground fine, and they put to death Mathan, the priest of Baal before his altars. So they went in and got the priest, killed him, and then destroyed all the images, and then destroyed the altar, ground everything down. And Jehoiada the priest committed the works of the house of the Lord in the hands of the priests and Levites. And he reestablished the daily rotations of the priests and the Levites as David separated for the house of the Lord to offer to the Lord whole burnt offerings, as is written in the law of Moses, with gladness and with odes by the hand of David. So Jehoiada does this great service to be ill repaid later, as we find out in the next chapter, maybe chapter 24 or 25, I'm not sure. And the gatekeepers stood at the gates of the house of the Lord, and those were those gates that were going to the courtyard, probably. Maybe, I'm not exactly sure. The gate of the house of the Lord would have been the large gate. And that there shall not enter in anything unclean. And he took patriarchos. We have patriarchs, comes from that. It's a transliteration. And the denatus, mighty ones, and the archontos of the people, and all the people of the land, and conducted the king, Joash, into the house of the Lord. So now they've brought him into the house of the Lord, and he entered through the inner gate into the house of the king. Now it's kind of confusing here. They entered, and maybe he went through there, and then I'm not sure. They took him from the house of the Lord, and then he entered in the inner gate of the house of the king, and they sat the king upon the throne of the kingdom, which would not have been in the house of the Lord. And all the people of the land were glad, and the city was still. And Athaliah they put to death by the sword. Now Joash reigns in Judah. Will be our next chapter, chapter 24. Hope you'll join us in chapter 24 as we continue this story with King Joash. And God bless.